you see something like that, and reports on social media, sometimes they're true, sometimes they're not. I tend to check on just about all of them, and this one by the user's name is Talk MMA. It turned out to be true. I started making phone calls and found out pretty quickly that, it was looking like she was off. Not a whole lot of details other than that, and as we see sort of what the story was and you hear Dana White's comments on it, there's a whole lot of other details to say, even now, now that we've kind of learned what happened, is that, she was, she informed the doctors that she was not feeling well. The commission was made aware of it. And, at the end of the day, the doctors did clear Amanda Nunes to fight Valentina Shevchenko on July 8th at UFC 213. And she said that, she couldn't do it. And so what are you going to do? At that point, you have to pull the fight.
What do you make of the fact that Dana White at the post-fight press conference said, well, based on everything that happened, the way the story unfolded, and Nunes' decision, he will not make her a main event again? I thought that was a very interesting comment from the post-fight presser.
Yeah, well, and it's a comment that sounds familiar. We remember him saying the same thing about Jon Jones and what happened when Jon Jones came back. His very first fight was headlining the pay-per-view, and I don't think anybody really thought that wouldn't be the case. When you're talking about Dana White's comments when it comes to this situation, I think the biggest question, obviously, is well, how do you feel about him sort of, essentially throwing his female bantamweight champion under the bus? He doesn't have to come out and say a whole lot of details. He doesn't have to come out and say, she was cleared. This was 90% mental and 10% physical. That's really what he said. That he felt he made it clear in his own way, in his terms, that he thought that she still could have taken the fight. So how do you feel about a UFC president doing that to one of his champions? I think at this point you come to expect it from Dana White, and I say that in the sense of, we know that this guy's emotional, and we know that when he gets angry. He talked about Demetrius Johnson tonight. When this guy is unhappy and things don't go the way that he feels they should go, or someone's telling him, no, I can't fight, and he's looking at a doctor's report that says we've cleared her, he's going to wear his emotions on his sleeve. I don't know how much good that does in this situation, but I'm never surprised by Dana White's reaction to this now, and so how do you feel about Amanda Nunes not taking the fight? I think that's really hard to say until she comes out and talks about the situation and what happened this week.
Before we get to the breakdown of UFC 213, does it seem like Dana White is sort of getting fed up? Because basically most of the time that he was at the post-fight press conference, it wasn't very flattering to his own fighters.
Well, I think that just sort of reflects how the first half of the year has gone, right? It has not been the best year in 2017. And he's got some issues. I mentioned the Demetrius Johnson case, which you brought up again. He's saying that was an exciting opportunity. People would have wanted to see that fight, and then my flyweight champion didn't want to take the fight. I think that Dana is coming to grips with, a different company that he is now part of. It had an identity. It was he and his best friends, the Fertitta brothers, running the place. Those days are over. The days of fighters just blindly sort of following everything that you tell them to do and having no leverage and not standing up for themselves, and the media coverage, all of that stuff is changed. So on a night like this, when he loses his main event, 5 hours before the doors open, again, it's just, I'm not surprised that Dana would have sort of, I guess, some negative things to say. But I will say at the same time, I didn't really share, I guess I don't share your opinion in that he just seemed negative and unhappy the entire press conference. I think, this is a guy who's really learned how to roll with the punches over the years, when fights fall through and cards fall apart. This card completely fell apart. Forget Amanda Nunes and Valentina Shevchenko. It was supposed to have Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw. It was supposed to have It was supposed to have Cowboy Cerrone and Robbie Lawler. This card completely fell apart, and Dana's head wasn't about to explode tonight. At least it didn't seem like it. So I guess he handled it pretty well.
Well, one thing we can say about UFC cards is that typically cursed UFC cards have a way of producing entertaining fights, and this one is no different. Why don't we break it down top to bottom? On the main card, in the main event, a new interim UFC middleweight champion. Robert Whittaker defeats Romero by unanimous decision. This one was a very exciting fight, was it not?
Oh, we knew it was going to be exciting, right? I mean, this fight was always going to be exciting. You had two guys who were at the top of their games. They had a lot of confidence. Robert Whittaker came in on a 7-fight win streak. Yoel Romero came in on an 8-fight win streak. And it really played out sort of the way that I thought it would, honestly. Yoel Romero is a fast starter. He's very explosive. But as time wears on, he loses some of that explosivity. And what do you have left? You have a guy who's a dangerous wrestler, but couldn't take Robert Whittaker down over the last 3 rounds. You have a guy who's sort of a one-punch guy. He doesn't throw a lot of combinations, and when you lose that speed, Robert Whittaker is aware of what you want to throw. This fight was always going to favor Robert Whittaker the longer it went. Now, the X factor that got thrown into that was the leg injury that Robert Whittaker suffered. And what can you can't underestimate, you can't understate. Is what I mean to say. You cannot understate how the champion level effort that Robert Whittaker gave to fight through that knee injury. I asked him at the press conference. You mentioned that this was an injury that you may have suffered in training. You could tell just by his response, he didn't want to give a whole lot of details on it, but you could tell that this was something that he had suffered in the camp. He was hoping that it would be all right once the fight starts. 2 minutes into the fight, and he's dealing with that injury. That mentally could have crippled a lot of people. He hung in the fight, lost the first 2 rounds, came back and won the next 3. I think he's a very deserving interim champion.
Yeah, how amazing is that? He loses the first 2 rounds on essentially one leg and then wins the next 3 rounds on a great game plan from his corner. Now, it was interesting hearing this. At the end of the first round, he sits down and he says, "My left leg is trashed." And just take us through what you saw and how that fight unfolded for the next 4 rounds, how he was able to rally. How could he do this on one leg against a guy like Yoel Romero?
It was a lot of heart, honestly, and that sounds cliche, but it was a lot of heart. I noticed that front side kick that hyperextended his knee. I think everybody noticed it. I think he even fell over from it, if my recollection is correct. And so you knew that was a significant strike. I didn't know sitting on press row how significant it was. Obviously, I didn't know that there were concerns about his left knee going into the fight. But then you sort of saw signs of it, right? I mean, you saw signs of him kind of sort of just hopping on it, trying to reset it, get it going a little bit, and it just didn't look all that stable, quite frankly. And in the 4th round, especially in the 4th round, that's when it became super obvious. I mean, he was literally sort of staggering on it at certain points. And that's when you knew, like, wow, this left leg is really injured. And, watching the fight live, I remember thinking, oh, no, because the momentum had turned. The turn of momentum happened in the 3rd round. The first round was Romero. The second round was Romero. And as you're watching it unfold, you're saying, well, yeah, Romero's winning those rounds, but Whittaker this isn't a terrible fight for Whittaker. The pace is kind of favoring him. If Romero does slow down, as we kind of suspected that he would, this might still be okay. And then that started to happen in the 3rd round. But in the 4th, when you see that leg injury, then you're like, oh, well, this changes everything. Now how can you take advantage of the cardio from Romero not being there? And he found a way to do it, man. I really just think he chomped down on his mouthpiece and fought through that pain, because the right front kicks were very effective. You got to plant on your left foot to do that. I don't know how he did that. I don't know how he defended those key takedowns and in those scrambles, the way the rotational effects that would have on your left knee. That's why I said earlier that he is a 100% deserving interim champion. You almost wish that the interim tag wasn't attached to it, because this was such an impressive performance by a 26-year-old Robert Whittaker.
So before we get to what will be next for Robert Whittaker, Yoel Romero said at the post-fight presser that he wants to watch that last 30 seconds of the 5th round and how he got taken down, or whether he fell, or whatever the sequence was, and essentially saying if that didn't happen, he feels like he very well could have won the fight. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think he's right, and that's not to. Obviously, after everything I just said, of course, I don't say that to discredit anything Whittaker did. I think that's the fight. I think Romero was tired, and when you're tired, your balance is off. And Whittaker had been hitting him so much to the body that I think the body work had really started to catch up to Romero. There were some shots to the head, but more so it was just the body work and the fatigue. You fall over. You're a 40-year-old guy who's in the 25th minute of a championship fight that's at a high pace, you lose your footing. And I really think that's what it comes down to. So, we can point at that moment and say that was the definitive moment. I mean, I was looking across the cage and I saw Michael Bisping put up his hands and say something to Dana White. And if I had $1 million, I would say that Michael Bisping told Dana White, that's it. That's the fight. Because you knew it. Both guys were tired. One guy goes down, he's on his back. The other guy's on top of him, dropping elbows. Fight's over, and but I think that the reason that happened was because of, the pace that